So these seated trauma-informed yoga practices can be done at the beginning of a session. So say, for example, you are working with a client, you may wish to start off your session with 10 or 15 minutes of trauma-informed yoga practices as a kind of introduction to the segue. That's how I've seen most clients or most therapists use this, or coaches. And so oftentimes in the traditional setting, we are sitting in a chair. So the first set of practices is for seated postures. So the first one we have is simple breath awareness. And for the purpose of our training, I am just talking about what this is in terms of the instructions that are provided. Now, of course, remember, when you are actually instructing your client, you want to use invitational language. You don't want to ever say, hands can rest anywhere. You can say, perhaps your hands rest somewhere that are comfortable. So just keep that in mind. For just space sake and time's sake, I did cut out a lot of the invitational language, so it's more concise and more clear cut here. But when you offer these instructions or teachings, just reintroduce those words at the beginning of the sentences, okay? So again, so for simple breath awareness, this is a technique that is probably one of the most accessible ways to start tuning into what's happening. And for this, the hands can rest anywhere. You can have them on the thighs. Some people like to have their arms kind of like they're interlaced around the elbows or maybe the armrests. Sometimes you can move the hands around, but that's not until later. The eyes can be open or closed. And one thing I've learned from working with my students that have been through trauma is that they don't want to close their eyes. They feel like they have to constantly monitor what's happening, or there's a sense of vigilance, a hypervigilance. So one thing that I found that helps them is for me to say, I will keep my eyes open if that gives you permission to close yours. And so by simply letting them know that, hey, I'll keep my eyes open, I'm going to keep a lookout, like I've got your back, I'm looking out at the space, it may give your client or the student the permission to feel like, okay, if she's going to take a look, I can go ahead and rest, I can close my eyes. And they might close their eyes and they say, nope, no, I want to keep them open. And then maybe they open their eyes back up. So again, there's permission. So you could say, like, perhaps you wish to close your eyes today, maybe you wish to keep them open. And that's how you address it. And one of the ways that we can work with noticing the breath is to start with inhaling. As we inhale, notice perhaps the coolness of the air as the breath flows into the nose, and the warmth of the breath as it leaves. So that's a simple technique, is to just notice the temperature of the air as it flows in and out of the nostrils. So you could, if you were working with a student, this could sound like, maybe you bring your attention to the nose, and if you would like to, notice how it feels as the air comes in, and notice how it feels as the air goes out. Something as simple as that. Other than the nose, you might also invite your student or client to notice the movement of the breath. So perhaps you say something along the lines of, notice the movement of the chest and the belly as you breathe in and out. Perhaps you bring your awareness to the upper back. Just notice how the breath feels. So you can direct them to observe different parts of the body as they breathe. You can also invite your students or clients to place the hands on the heart. So you could say, you may wish to bring the hands to the heart. And if you would like to, notice how the breath feels. Notice how the breath moves underneath the palms. Another option is to bring the hands to the belly And one of my favorites, and the favorites that my students love, is to bring one hand to the heart and one hand to the belly. And to notice how the breath feels as the hands rest on the chest and belly. So this is the first technique, a simple breath awareness. The second technique is called a sun breath. Sun breaths are wonderful. They are in a traditional class. You'll see them more in arms expand out and come back into the heart, and then arms expand out. So there are these big swooping movements with the hands, and oftentimes you're straightening and bending the knees as well. And they're meant to be very dynamic and open up the body. And as you can imagine, in a trauma-informed setting, such a drastic movement can feel very jolting, maybe even very too much. It can be too much to open up that much. It can feel very vulnerable to just simply expand and open the chest in this way. And so we don't want to ever jump into the extreme of any posture. So instead, we can start with choices. We can start with A and then build up to B and then maybe C. Or in this case, you can start with option 1 or option 2 and then play around to building up to option 3 if that feels comfortable. So a big part of this is building trust. A big part of this is the student being able to build trust when they're within their body. Like, okay, if I can start with a gentle movement, okay, I can handle this. This feels okay. Maybe I play around with building it up. Okay, maybe this feels okay. So maybe I can go into it more, or perhaps it doesn't feel okay, so I just stay smaller. So it's about giving them a range that they can work with instead of just going into the most expansive and dramatic expression. And so with that being said, for sun breaths, option 1 is to let the hands rest on the thighs. Perhaps you invite your client to simply notice and say, if you'd like in this moment, notice how it feels to have the hands resting on the thighs. Notice what you feel. Perhaps you notice the breath. And then if you would like to, you can lift the hands upward. And then perhaps you let the hands lower back down. Perhaps you play around with this movement or explore how this movement feels for you. Lifting the hands up and lowering the hands down. You're welcome to tell your clients or students to set their own pace. So you can invite them to go as fast or as slow as they would like in terms of raising and lowering the hands. And if you seem comfortable with that, then you can say, maybe you allow the movement of the hands to coordinate with the breath. So perhaps as the hands lift upward, you take a breath in, and perhaps as the hands lower back down, you let the breath exhale. And then you can play around in that. So you can see how this is a very subtle movement, but it can help to create that invitation into the sun breath. Option 2, if you wanted to play around with another variation, is to start the hands together at the heart, and then you can tell your clients if perhaps you expand the arms out and bring them back together. You can explore this movement. If you wish, you can expand the arms out even further and bring them back in. If you would like to, you can coordinate this movement with the breath. Maybe with your inhale, you take the arms out, and maybe with the exhale, you bring the hands in. So that's option 2. Option 3 is to start the hands at the thighs, and this is where you can say, if you would like to, I'd invite you to expand and send the arms towards the ceiling or just send them upward. And then you can allow the hands to come down to the center. And perhaps you continue with this movement, or maybe you wish to return back to the prior version, option 1 or 2. And so that's how you would work through instructing these sun breaths. So inhaling and exhaling, or inhale to rise the arms, exhale to lower, or inhale to expand out and exhale to come in. So these are the 3 variations of sun breaths. They're very simple movements. You can try them out for a few minutes at the beginning of a session before you start at any time. And then the third expression, the third posture to consider in seated trauma-informed yoga is what's called as the seated mountain. For seated mountain, you would want to invite your clients to perhaps place the feet on the ground, hips distance apart. One thing that I find helps my students is for them to be able to look down and look at the feet and notice, oh, okay, that's where my feet are, and then maybe notice, ask your clients or students to feel the weight in the feet. Maybe they play around with shifting from side to side and just notice how that feels in the body. Maybe notice how that feels throughout the legs. And then from here, for seated mountain, you would invite your clients to come forward on the chair and sit up tall. Because oftentimes there's a slouching that tends to happen. So you can invite them to sit up comfortably tall. And then the hands can rest on the thighs and the shoulders. If you notice the shoulders are hunched up towards the ears, you may invite them to rest the shoulders away from the ears and ask your clients to notice how this feels along the back, or notice how it feels in the body. And so this is, again, very simple seated mountain. So you're just taking them from sitting, however, into a more intentional way of sitting. And then ask and invite your clients to notice, how did simply shifting the way you sit change what you're feeling, or notice what comes up when you do that. The fourth technique, or the fourth posture, is the seated forward fold. For this posture, there are several ways. You can keep the hands on the thighs or knees and bend at the elbows as you lean forward. And so this is a forward fold. And one instruction or cue you can use in this is, if you would like to, notice how it feels along the back when you fold forward. Or you don't even need to say the back. You could say, notice how it feels in your body as you forward fold. Option to also bring the elbows down to the thighs and come forward even more, or you may even invite the students to release the hands down towards the ground and let them bring the belly towards the thigh and just let them hang in that forward fold. So there's a range. Again, you can start up tall, just bend the elbows a little bit, or go mid-range where the elbows are resting on the thighs, or go all the way down with the hands on the ground. So again, use lots of inviting language, ask them to notice what they're feeling, ask them to notice their breath all along the way, and then give them time to come back up and observe what they're feeling. Now, the next type of movement we can explore in a seat or in a chair are shoulder and neck rolls. So like anything else, you can start off with asking if you would, I would invite you to drop the right ear to the right shoulder, bring the chin to chest, lift the head up, and then drop the left ear to left shoulder. And then you can play around with half circles from one shoulder to the next, noticing how that, asking your client to notice how that feels. Or another option is you can actually, for version 1, you can keep the hands lower down and play around with drawing circles with the shoulders, or you can bring the hands to the shoulders and explore drawing circles with their shoulders in this way. And so the good thing about neck and shoulder rolls is that this is an opportunity to invite your clients to set their own rhythm. So you can say, notice how we feel. You may wish to go faster. You may wish to go slower. Do what feels right in your body. I invite you to do what feels right in the body. Languaging like that, where students feel like, oh, now, it's not just, I'm not just like doing emotion, but now I get to set the pace of the motion. I get to explore how it feels to move quicker or slower, and notice how it feels to change things up in terms of the rhythm and getting into a certain type of flow. The next set of exercises you could do in a seated session are the 6 spinal movements. And so the 6 spinal movements are the forward fold and back bend, and then we have the side bends, and then we have twists. So in this case, we're not doing the full 6, but the first one is cat and cow, where you can invite the client to bring the shoulder blades together as they come forward with the collarbones and the sternum. And then maybe you now experiment with curving the spine to the back of the chair. Maybe you hug the belly in. Perhaps you come forward again, lifting through the heart. And perhaps you curve through the spine again. Notice how it feels in your body. And allow yourself to make any changes that would feel good to you. Allow yourself to modify these movements in a way that would feel good to you. So that's a simple way to guide a seated cat and cow. You could also do side bends, lateral side bends, where one hand can simply rest on the chair or on the thigh, and the other arm can reach up and bend over to the opposite side. You can give your clients a few moments to observe how that feels. Say, languaging around this could be, I invite you to experiment with sending the left arm up. Notice how this feels in the body. Perhaps you feel sensations along the left side of the body. If you wish, you may want to experiment with taking the left hand over to the right side and notice the changes in the sensations. And perhaps you come back up when you feel ready. And that's a simple way to guide it. So then you could do it to the other side and bring it back up. And that's another thing to consider too, is that you can offer your clients permission to come out of the posture whenever they want. So they don't need to wait for you to say to come out of it. They don't need to wait till you come out of it. You can tell them, feel free to come out of the posture whenever you wish and come back in whenever you wish. So give them permission to enter and exit the form whenever they want. Okay, and so the next set of spinal movements would be the twist. And a simple way to instruct twists is to bring the right hand to the left thigh and the left hand behind you. It's twisting to the left side, or you can twist to the right side by bringing the left hand to the right thigh and the right hand behind you. So so you can twist from side to side in that way, and ask them, again, what do you feel? How does this land? And whatnot. So these are some of the spinal movements that you can experiment with. And the last and final set of postures that you can explore, or forms you can explore, are the legs. So the front of our legs, the quadriceps, they're very strong muscles, and it's a good way to start building that self-awareness is by tapping into the legs. So option 1 is to invite the client to notice the feet on the ground, perhaps bring the hands to the thighs. And if it feels comfortable to you, you may wish to stand up at this time, and you can have them stand up and then come back down and say, notice where you felt that. Notice where the body was working to support you to standing to sitting, sitting to standing. So that's option one. Another way to notice the legs is to slide one leg out in front of you along the floor so the heel can stay on the ground. If they feel comfortable, they can stay there, or if they want to, you can invite them to lift the heel off the ground and notice what they feel in the body or in the leg at that time. So those are two of the ways that you can explore working with legs. So to summarize, we have simple breath awareness, we had sun breaths, we had the neck and shoulder circles. We explored the movement through the 6 spinal movements, so cat and cow, side bends, and twists. We also explored the seated mountain, seated forward fold where you come forward, and then playing around with the legs and movement through the legs. So when you are doing your 10 minutes or 15 minutes at the beginning of a session, you can do one of these techniques. You can do 2 or 3 of these techniques. You can do a little sequence, perhaps. You don't need to do all of it. It's quite a bit to kind of fit into 15 minutes. You don't want to rush. Again, remember, one of the key components of creating that safe environment is to speak in a steady tone. So you don't need to do all of these. There's a lot within these 7 slides. So you could even just play around with 2 or 3 and notice how that feels. And maybe you do the same thing every week, or perhaps you change it up every week. And it's really let the student, let the client decide, and ask them, did you like that movement? Would you like to try it again? Would you not like to try it again? Are you comfortable returning to it? Things like that. I think really letting them know that, again, you're just the tour guide, you're just facilitating it, but this time is really about them learning to feel their body, learning to feel what feels acceptable to the body, recognizing they have the power to make the choice in response to those feelings, and then reconnecting to that sense of self through that process of feeling, noticing, and choice. So it's a dance between all of the elements, and they're kind of like, the feeling, the choice, and the noticing, and all the empowerment. It's kind of like, okay, it's not like a straight line, but it's kind of all mixed together like a soup or something. So that concludes this segment on the basic tenets to be aware of when you're teaching trauma-informed yoga in a session, and the 7 basic movements that could help in a seated aspect. And we will be back for part 3. Hello, and welcome back. In this last and final segment of using trauma-informed yoga with our clients and students, I will be addressing the topic of restorative yoga. Now, restorative yoga is different in the sense that in a traditional class or in a normal gentle or hatha class, you tend to go through the postures rather quickly, maybe pausing for a few breaths, but nothing for too long. In a restorative yoga practice, you hold the postures for a much longer period of time, anywhere from 7 to 13 minutes. Holding the postures for a longer period of time in a passive way that is supported by the use of pillows or bolsters really helps to shift the nervous system into a more calm state. Restorative yoga has had a profound benefit on all of my students. It has helped them to find a greater sense of peace within themselves. It has helped them to learn how to work with their minds, especially in modes when they feel chaotic or out of control. So even though it's one of those types of yoga that can be overlooked, like, oh, it's just, they're just relaxing on bolsters and pillows, I have found restorative yoga to be one of the most profound ways to have a positive impact on my students, especially when they're working with a nervous system that is very frazzled from being in that sympathetic mode due to tension or stress or trauma. So as a bonus, I wanted to go over 5 of my favorite yoga postures that I use with my students in order to help deepen that self-awareness. Now, given that restorative yoga postures are held longer, typically from 7 to 13 minutes, usually when working with a client, you may only practice 1 or 2 postures for 15 minutes, each one for about 7 minutes. You may also opt to do 1 posture for a full 10 minutes and just let them rest in that place and then come out of it and then continue with your session. So again, unlike the 7 types of movement and techniques we talked about before, in this one, you're choosing 1 posture perhaps and allowing your client or student to simply rest and settle into it. Now, in the case that a client feels like it's too much to hold still for that long, you can welcome them to come out, take any movements that feel good to them, and return to the pose or posture, rather, when they feel ready. So let's begin. The first posture is supported child. In supported child, it's really helpful to have a blanket underneath the knees, as you can see here. This helps to protect the knees. I also like to curl up the blanket a little bit to support the foot and the ankle. In addition to the blanket supporting the knees, the shins, and the ankle, it is nice to have a bolster or a pillow underneath the torso. Adding an extra blanket on top of the bolster can help to create a more comfortable sensation in the body. As always, with restorative postures, just like the other postures, this is an invitation to your clients. So languaging around this may sound something like, you may wish to bring a blanket for the knees and bring a bolster closer to you. If you feel comfortable, you may experiment with lowering the torso down to the bolster and making any adjustments that would be soothing to the body. You are welcome to stay in this posture as long as you would like. And at any time, you can come out of the posture as you wish and come back in when you're ready, or perhaps you come out of the posture and stay away from it for a while. So that would be kind of the languaging around it, where you instruct them, you guide them into it, let them know you'll have the opportunity to be in there for, you can tell them about 7 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, but also give them permission to leave the posture and come back when they're ready. So this is supported child's posture. When I'm working with my students, sometimes I will ask a student if they would like some extra support for the lower back or some extra sense of comfort. And if they say yes, then I ask them if it's okay for me to place a blanket over their back or their lower back. That blanket covering the spine or covering the lower back can help make them feel more safe in that moment. So again, with anything with offering, you want to ask your students or your clients, is it okay if I add a blanket, or would you like me to cover you with a blanket in this posture? Supported child's pose can be a wonderful way to invite the clients to notice how they're feeling along the spine, to notice how they're feeling at the legs. It's also a very wonderful way to notice how the breathing is. With the chest and the belly resting on the bolster and blanket, the ability to notice the feeling of our breath becomes a little easier in this posture. The second restorative posture is the forward fold. In the segment prior, we talked about a seated forward fold where we sit in a chair and either bring the hands to the knees and bend at the elbows, or we bring the elbows to the thighs or bring the hands down to the floor. Now, in a more restorative version of the forward fold, there are 2 ways we can approach this. The first option is to sit on a blanket and to have a chair with either a pillow or a bolster on it. The forehead can rest on the bolster or it can rest on the block, depending on how the client feels. Some clients feel comfortable leaning forward more, and others prefer to be more upright. So feel free to build up the props as much as they need in order to feel supported. The idea in these restorative postures is to have the body do as little work as possible. So we support the body with all the props necessary so that the body can relax and so that the nervous system can also have a chance to settle in. I like to think of it as if we're holding a bottle with water in it and we're shaking the bottle around. We can imagine how the bottle is representative for the body and the water is representative for the mind or the nervous system. We cannot expect the nervous system or the water in the bottle to settle down if the body is still shaking and moving around. So first, we must set the bottle down, and then the water will naturally calm down. Similarly, first, we must set the body up in a comfortable, supported, passive posture, like one of these, and then the central nervous system has an opportunity to calm down. The second way to practice a forward fold without a chair is to add a bolster or a pillow underneath the knees instead. If you don't have a pillow, you can also use another blanket, but oftentimes clients and students find it very comforting to have some support underneath the thighs or underneath the knees. Then you may wish to build up and add bolsters or blocks in order to let the forehead rest in a more comfortable way. So either one of these variations can work. And these are great if you have the ability to invite these postures off of the chair, or perhaps you have a little space in your office where they can sit on the floor. This is a wonderful way to practice the forward fold. Or you can simply offer this posture as a suggestion for them to experiment with for the week before they come back in. The third restorative posture to consider is what's called a supported bridge. In supported bridge, we want to have a blanket underneath the head and neck to support it. So as you can see in this picture, there's a blanket that's been folded to support the natural curve of the neck. In addition to that, it is really helpful to have a bolster or a pillow underneath the hips. So having this underneath the hips, underneath the lower back, can help to elevate the pelvis. In this posture, the feet can be wider and the knees can be bent with the inner thighs resting against each other. Or you can find another version that works better for the legs. Supported bridge is a wonderful way to bring the awareness into the back. In general, in yoga, when we practice back bends, they are said to help to strengthen the back and to strengthen the muscles of the back. In addition to that, they help to bring awareness to the belly and the heart. So one of my favorite ways to practice supported bridge is to bring my hands to the belly, as you can see in this picture, and to focus on the breathing, to notice how it feels as I breathe in and the belly rises upward, and notice how it feels when I breathe out and the belly falls down. Being able to tap into the rhythm of my own breath is very soothing. And offering the same for my students has also been very helpful to them. Supported bridge is a wonderful posture. You can practice it for about anywhere between 7 to 10 minutes. And after they're done, you can invite the student to slowly move the props aside, maybe roll over to one side or hug the knees into the chest and then come back up to a seat and ask them to notice what they feel. How does it feel to have practiced the posture? And how does it feel to come back up? Maybe they notice changes, maybe they notice nothing at all. And again, that's all okay. It's just the process of looking inward and noticing that journey as it unfolds. The next posture is waterfall. This is one of my favorite restorative postures and postures period in the yoga practice. I do this one almost every day, and every class I teach, there's always a waterfall in it at some point. This one has tremendous benefits to the mind and body, which I won't go into at this time, but let's talk about some of the key anatomical components of this posture. First and foremost, we want a blanket to help support the head, as you can see here. You can also add a blanket or a pillow underneath the lower back, as you can see in the back. In this expression, it's really helpful to have a wall. So what you can do is bring the bolster or the blanket right up to the wall and bring the sit bones, invite your client to bring the sit bones as close to the wall as possible and send the legs up the wall. As they send the legs up the wall, you might find that they are able to do that with no problem. But in some situations, if the hamstrings or the lower back are really tight, what I like to do is offer a chair to my students. And what I'll say is, instead of using a wall, we can come up to the chair and just let the calves and the legs rest on a chair with the knees bent. So you can also try that version. In waterfall, it is helpful to allow the arms to open up, as it can invite the student and the client to start observing the sensation of what it means to open up along the front of the body. Oftentimes, I see trauma survivors tend to round through the spine and close off their hearts with the shoulders rounding forward. So the act of opening up the arms can feel very empowering, especially when done so in a safe and comfortable environment. Sometimes, if I have the extra props, I will add little pillows or blocks underneath the hands or the wrists so that the arms feel supported. And a lot of my students, especially when working in a trauma-informed setting, really find it helpful to have an extra blanket over the belly or to have something draping over the feet. The sensation of having an extra blanket over the belly or over the feet can feel very calming to the student or client. So these variations and these alternatives are something you can talk to your student or client about and kind of discover together. You can ask them, how would you like to have a blanket, perhaps to rest on the belly? Would you like to try having a blanket draped over the feet? And so by asking these questions that invite your students and clients to make a choice about whether or not they want to try something, they can learn to discover, hey, that feels good in my body, or, oh yeah, I don't like how that feels in my body. And so this is waterfall. Again, my favorites. Try it out. Even if it's just for a moment, let me know what you think. And the next posture is Stonehenge. This is a spectacular way to let the body release. And in this posture, again, you want to lay on a blanket to help support the lower back and the spine, as well as adding a blanket underneath the head to support the neck. In this expression, you can see there are blocks here with a bolster on top. So we're kind of creating a platform for the legs to then drape over, so the knees are fully supported by the bolster. This posture and this expression of the posture is a really wonderful way to invite the students and clients to notice how it feels and notice how the legs feel. There's an invitation for body awareness in the legs as the legs get heavy and sink into the bolster or blocks. Again, remember, if you don't have all these fancy yoga props, that's okay. Instead of blankets, you can use towels. Instead of blocks, you can use books. And instead of bolsters, you can use pillows or any other cushion that works for you. As you can see in this pose or in this posture, I have my hands resting on my belly. Again, it's to help with having that sense of awareness of the breath. It's an easy way to notice the breath when you have a point of contact resting on the body in this way. So just to recap, the restorative postures we discussed in this session are child's pose, the back bend, we have waterfall, the supported forward fold, and Stonehenge. My hope is that these postures will allow you to explore and invite your students to welcome the journey inward in a more accessible way. Sometimes it can feel very daunting to have the students jump into trying certain movements. It can feel very overwhelming to just even flow through a couple rounds of sun breaths or twist from side to side. So, in situations where clients or students don't feel quite ready to work into more dynamic expressions of trauma informed yoga, these restorative postures might feel more accessible, and vice versa. If you're working with a client that wants to move more, then maybe these restorative postures, they're not the best thing. Perhaps you explore more with the dynamic movements and then go into restorative postures if they wish. Long In the long run, it's about allowing and empowering your clients to know and to recognize what feels good and what feels right in their body so they can start to reclaim that sense of ownership for themselves.